Right. Good evening. Welcome to another Sharklab open session. Today I'm going to be talking about sharks in film. There are quite a lot of sharks in quite a lot of films, so I will try not to overrun too much, but I have cut it down quite a bit. So, sharks in film. What do you think about when you hear sharks in film? Probably something like this. Which should work. Oh, come on.
There is a creature alive today who has survived millions
Now,
of
I hope
years
you can
of
actually hear the
evolution
sound on this.
without change,
Yes, we can.
without passion, and without logic. It lives to kill.
Nice bit of
A
underwater rubbish there.
mindless eating machine. It will attack and devour anything. It is as if God created the devil and gave him jaws.
Right, well, you probably recognize that as the opening to Jaws, the film. And the actress, well, actually, the stunt woman that you've just seen being pulled underwater, had a rather surprised expression on her face. And the reason for that is there a bit of an echo coming from somewhere? Okay, Pamela's. Okay. So anyway, a bit of a surprised look on her face is because the idea was they were going to go on 3, but Spielberg decided to go on 2 instead. So the look of surprise on her face is where she's being dragged underwater and hadn't quite managed to take a breath. So the slightly panicky look on her face as she comes back up is understandable. So this is Jaws, and you've probably seen the film. I hope you've seen the film. If not, it's a good one to go and have a look at. And there's the poster for it. You've probably seen the poster. You've seen the film. You might well have seen Jaws and thought, I wonder if there's anything else interesting to see. This is probably not it. Shark in Venice did die a film, but it's one of these genre of shark films that we've got. But, you know, you've probably got a good idea of how these sort of films are made. They're in a swimming pool. They've got lots of underwater cameras and lights and things like that. That's true. And this is slightly more interesting because this is a green screen effect. And this is the last scene from the film Gravity with Sandra Bullock. And she's going up through through all the weed and the fish and things like that, which of course aren't there, but they are when you actually see the film. Okay. Now, this is not the sort of camera they use these days. It's an old plate camera, probably from the 1890s, 1900s. And, you know, you wouldn't try and put that underwater to film with. But that was the sort of thing that was around. But when did we first start to get pictures or films? Well, films are moving pictures. That's a question. Why should we call them films? Strips, ribbons makes more sense when you think about what a film looks like. But why should we call them films? Well, we'll look at that a bit later. So this is the first photograph. And before we can talk about films, we have to talk a little bit about photographs. And this is the first photograph. And it took 8 hours. The exposure was 8 hours. Now, what's quite interesting is if you see the original plate, and that's it, and it is literally a plate, it's a tin plate, and if you look, you can see the image there, but this is not the way we normally see images on film. We normally see them as negatives, and then we have to print them to get them right, but this is the other way, and that's because this photograph was made with bitumen, you know, the stuff that they put on the roads. So how exactly did this work? Well, this is a particular type of bitumen, and when light falls on it, it goes hard. It polymerizes, but it goes hard. So what the guy did was he covered the plate with this bitumen stuff, put it in the light. Where the light hit, it went hard. He then took it, put it in some solvent, lavender water, which seems to be a solvent for bitumen, always useful to know, and dissolved away the bits that the light hadn't touched. Now, bear in mind, it doesn't look too great, this plate. It is 200 years old. So, you know, it's bound to be in a little bit of bad condition. And then, in order to create the picture, what he did was coated it with printer's ink, wiped off the excess, so the printer's ink was held in the areas that had been dissolved away, or the dark areas where the light hadn't hit. And then, when he put a piece of paper over it, pressed it down, that's what he got. So it was it's not the way we normally think of this. Now, 8-hour exposure, not going to be much good for the F1 or anything else like that. So this was an interesting experiment. It had uses, but not particularly for the sort of uses that we have photography today. So moving on, this is a description of what it is. We're going to put the presentation up on the website fairly soon, and so you'll be able to go through, and I'm going to leave out a lot of the things that I've got more detail on, and you can have a look at those if you're interested, just to make it flow a bit better. Okay, this is a photo by Daguerre. Daguerre created the daguerreotype. Oh, that's surprising. But you'll notice, if you look at this picture, the trees at the back in the center seem to be a bit more blurred than the ones at the front. And the reason for this is they're moving. You also notice there are no people around. That's because they move too fast. This was a 30-minute exposure. Better than 8 hours, but 30 minutes, still quite a long time. Okay, but it was an improvement. So Daguerre did this. But the next thing to come along was the wet collodion process. Now, this was quick enough, it worked quickly enough that you could actually get traveling photographers going around, taking people's pictures, pictures of buildings, all sorts of things like that. And the wet collodion process, as its name suggests, was wet. You had to use the plates wet, otherwise it didn't work. And what you did was you took a glass plate and you put around the edges egg white. I'll explain why later. Put around the edges egg white, and then you poured on the collodion. And the idea was to get a very, very thin layer of the collodion. Didn't want any lumps or bumps or anything else. Really thin layer. And then you left it to dry a little bit. Now, collodion was dissolved in ether. So when it dried, the ether came off. So the guy in the tent there, he's having a nice time, because ether, of course, is what used to be used as an anesthetic, like chloroform and things like that. So, you know, he's probably a bit lightheaded. He's in there. He's got all the chemicals in there for doing the developing. And so what he's going to do, he's going to take that plate, and he's going to, once it's a little bit tacky, he's going to put it in silver nitrate and get a thin layer of silver nitrate on. Now, the plate that he's got, which has a very thin layer of collodion on, is known as a filmed plate. It has a thin film of collodion on it. Therefore, those plates ready for use were known as films. So you could take your films and you could prepare them, and you could take a picture. So that's where we get the name film for photographs. So what he's able to do there is he takes the plate, puts the collodion on, takes the silver nitrate, puts it in a wooden holder so as you get fingers on it, and then slips it in the little, you can see there's like a little socket on the left-hand side. He slips them in there when they can be taken and then slotted into the camera. And in fact, quite often the cameras and the developing things were all one thing, because all you needed at the front was a lens and a box, and that would work. So why is this process quite so interesting? Well, one of the reasons is what collodion is. So let's look at the process again. Glass plate, edges, coat with collodion, place the camera well wet, expose for a couple of minutes. Process, create the negative, and print. And it was devised by Frederick Arthur. Now, what is collodion? It's an interesting stuff. Obviously, something organic because it dissolves in organic materials. Its actual name is cellulose nitrate, but this is also known as nitrocellulose or gun cotton. Gun cotton is used in, or was used in, torpedoes and shells and things like that. It's a pretty good explosive. So what you've got here is plates covered with explosive, which is particularly dangerous when it's dry. Now, you may think, well, it's wet, so it's pretty inert. So this is fairly safe. However, if you get a plate that doesn't work, then you don't want to throw it away. You take it out of the wooden cover that it's been put into, which has slides in it. So you just slide it out. Now, the edges of the glass rub against the wood and create friction. If you actually have nitrocellulose on the edges, as they found out very quickly, and you remove it fairly quickly, you can end up with a fire and an explosion. Now, if you're doing that inside one of those tents, that's distinctly bad news because you've got all these dangerous chemicals, including sodium thiosulfate, potassium ferricyanide, and you could have a lot of problems. Photographers were known to be a bit strange. It's hardly surprising, bearing in mind the load of chemicals that they were working with. So that was the wet collodion process, and it was one of the first ones that was used in underwater cameras. And this is one of the first underwater cameras. And this was created by a French academic, I suppose we could call him a French academic, and he wanted to take pictures underwater. And this is the first picture we think he's taken underwater. We're using a camera very similar to the one that you've just seen. Basically a metal box with a proper camera inside it. And here we are, we've got 3 children, I think probably his, standing in the water on some sort of jetty, and he's there. It doesn't seem to be a terribly long exposure. There's a fair amount of light obviously coming down. So he's managed to make quite a reasonable picture. But 1893 is not bad for the first underwater picture. And here he is, the man himself. And now he's at 3 meters. Now this picture's not so good. And the reason is that at 3 meters, there's less light. And therefore it needs a longer exposure. And you'll notice that he's actually hanging onto an anchor. He's dived down, he's hanging onto an anchor. So he's in the same position as much as he can be for taking the picture, so as it doesn't become blurred. So he's holding as still as he can for probably about 30 seconds or a minute. Okay, but this process, the film stock got better, or the film plates got better. The wet collodion process went out of use, and other ones came in, a dry process. So that was a lot easier. So what he did was he improved his camera, and he put a place so that you could actually put multiple plates in, and then you could take more than one picture at any one time once you got the camera in place. Now, he created postcards. Now, you have to realize that most people had never seen these things under the sea. A lot of people could never had never been to the sea. Going to the seaside was a big surprise, you know, and actually swimming in the water and swimming under the water was things people just didn't do. So he created postcards. In fact, a picture of him here on the right-hand side, he's probably actually using a bucket with a glass bottom just to see what there is there before he starts carting the camera around, because it's quite heavy, because it's got a full-size camera inside it as well. So here are other things that he used to do, and people went mad over these. These were real, you know, state of the art. You know, it's your iPhone of the day. It was quite fantastic. So here he is again, taking the first proper underwater selfie. Now he's in a diving gear. He's down at 27 meters, and he's got a plate in his hand, and the plate probably says in French something like, "This is the world's first underwater selfie," and it's shining. Now it's shining a lot, which seems a bit unusual underwater, because 27 meters, there's not a lot of light there. The reason for that is that he also invented a strobe. Now, it's not the sort of strobe you would want to use these days. So here it is. It's a barrel full of chemically produced oxygen. So oxygen. It's got a bladder at the bottom, so that as you take it down, and obviously it needs a fair amount of weight to hold it down, as you take it down, the pressure equalizes. So the water doesn't try to rush in. So it pushes the bladder up. So what happens then is that the oxygen is pushed up through the little alcohol burner there and produces a light. And if you look at the diver, look at his right hand, he's actually holding a bulb. And the idea of this is when he squirts that bulb, that takes finely powdered magnesium and squirts into the flame. And when that happens, you get a very big flash. And you'll probably have seen in these old pictures where they have the photographers have a stick with something on it, and they press a button and there's a big flash and they're able to take a picture. Well, this is exactly the same principle. However, it is a barrel full of oxygen. If you squeeze too hard, you might get too big a flash, which might have a flashback from the alcohol flame into the oxygen, which could cause a little problem. And in fact, sometimes he would do this and the whole top of the barrel would blow off, which would be a bit unfortunate. So he was a clever lad, and he became the director of one of the Paris museums, but he was really the first person to do proper underwater photography. So moving the camera around, normally they would have, because it's quite a heavy thing, quite solid, because it's down at 30 meters, much stronger than the first one I showed you. So they would have a barrel of sorts to reduce the weight so you could lift it more easily. So this, we go to 1890 and Georges Méliès. Now, Georges Méliès was a Frenchman, and he produced all sorts of weird and wonderful films, including A Trip to the Moon, using a combination of moving backdrops and special effects and things like that. And here he did a submarine railway, supposedly under the Atlantic. And as the people sat there, as though you were in the train, there would be a moving background, and it did actually show sharks, but not spectacularly well. So it wasn't really an underwater film, but it was very popular in its day. And here we have The Perils of Pauline. The Perils of Pauline was a well-known serial sort of thing that you would see at Saturday morning pictures, probably. So we have The Perils of Pauline, and this is the first instance of a shark-infested swimming pool. Unfortunately, I haven't got any film of it. I haven't managed to find any film. But Pauline got thrown into the shark-infested swimming pool, and with great ability, managed to pull a knife out of her underwear. Inside somewhere she got it hidden, and killed the shark. And then got out and did nasty things to the bad guy, who is, as you can see in there, he's not about to throw in the swimming pool in that particular section, but he did throw her in anyway to try and kill her. And this is something that sharks are quite used to these days in films of this time. If you want to kill someone off, throw them to the sharks. It looks very good and looks very painful. So we come to the actual first underwater film. This is the first film which has actual underwater footage, and 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, which for those of you who are working in the phone, why does that always phone? Okay, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, which for those of you trying to work out is actually 60,000 miles, which is approximately 72,000. I think 72,000 kilometers. So we'll go on. They had a stunt octopus for the filming, and what I found is a little film made by someone else, which actually talks about the way the shots were got by this. And it's really quite surprising. It's not what you would think. It's not a case of putting a camera in a waterproof container and taking it into the sea. They had a much better idea. And I'll leave the narration to explain what goes on. Oops, that shouldn't have worked. It shouldn't have happened. Sometimes it does it, sometimes it doesn't.
Let me tell you about the world's first underwater motion picture. That's a dead horse. That's the inventor of the filming technique. That's a knife in his hand. And that's a shark. But that's later. The story begins, as it must, with Jules Verne. All good stories below the ocean's surface do. The year is 1916. The silent film of his 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea is the only production of its kind in the world, with sights that for thousands of centuries have been denied to mankind. In the picture, the first time you see out of Captain Nemo's magic window, the fiction of Verne's adventure stops. For almost 9 minutes, a documentary of sorts plays out like this.
From our point of view, not too
The
wonderful.
magic window is, in reality,
for everyone
the
else
porthole
that had
of
never
the
seen it,
photosphere.
or a shark in the water like
Nautilus
that.
ship come to life. This is the photosphere. This is its inventor, J.E. Williamson. J.E.'s father, a sea captain and shipwreck scavenger, had previously designed a deep-sea salvaging device, a tube affixed to a windowed chamber capable of reaching great depths.
He's English,
Lightning,
tries to
of
get from
course,
one place
struck.
to the other.
J.E. would add a
Digs a
lamp to
tunnel through
illuminate
the
the water and design a viewing chamber with larger windows. Also, he dropped the camera down the hatch. In 1914, J.E. got backing for his first filming experiment, christened the barge the Jules Verne, and set a course for the Bahamas. What you're seeing right now is the first motion picture recorded below the ocean's surface, the result of J.E.'s experiment. How strange that the first moving images recorded of this little seen world were of a dead horse lowered upside down as bait for a shark. Not only to lure the shark to the camera, but to lure it to its death. That violence was preferred over beauty. J.E. promised his finance series a fight between man and shark. The first take was of a hired Bahamian diver, but he killed a shark just out of the camera's frame. The second take was of J.E. himself. He remembered it like this. I grasped the monster's fin, felt my hand close upon it. With a twist, I was under the livid white belly at the spot I was trying to reach. With all my remaining strength, I struck. A quivering thrill raced up my arm as I felt the blade bury itself to the hilt in the flesh. Then a blur, confusion, chaos. J.E. Williamson again. Somehow I had managed to reach the deck. Still panting from exertion, my head in a whirl, I slid down the tube in time to witness the end of the shark. With upturned belly gleaming in the wavering sunlight filtering through the waters, the dead monster was drifting away. 6,000 feet of celluloid ribbon later, the Jules Verne set a course back to America. The resulting film was exhibited under the title 30 Leagues Under the Sea, and later came to be known as The Terrors of the Deep.
So sadly, the very first proper film of a shark underwater ended up with the shark being dead. But you have to realize that in those days, they didn't really understand much about sharks. So they sort of assumed that if you're in the water with a shark, it would immediately attack you. So killing the shark, not much of a monster though, really. Anyway, we move forward now to the 1930s. And this is one of a series of different films set in somewhere in Asia. different supposed islands and things. And it was mainly a way of allowing native women to go around with very few clothes on, and called itself a documentary. Anyway, the sharks in this, as normal, if you want to get rid of a bad guy, throw them to the sharks. And this is the bad guy being thrown to the shark. And pretty much that's the only shark bits in it. So once again, sharks are the bad guys. They never really turn out to be the good guys. Now, we move on a few years, and this is a slightly different Hollywood type production, Howard Hawks, and it has Edward G. Robinson, who was quite a well-known actor, played Al Capone and things like that, in Tiger Shark. And this is not him in the picture. And in fact, this whole sequence with the shark, the guy with the hook and everything else like that is not in the picture at all. But as usual, if you want to get rid of the bad guy, and there's the bad guy, he's going into the water. So to get rid of him, here he is. Let's see if this one works.
Hold on, Mike.
There he is, into the water. The next thing we know, here come the sharks. And there goes Eddie.
I'll take him. He belongs with you.
So Edward G. Robinson acting his heart out. He wasn't a terribly good actor. However, he does end up getting the girl. And here he is, gets the girl, getting married. And she's looking a bit strange. And the reason for that is the guy he's just kicked and murdered into the water was her fiance. So he gets the girl and gets rid of the fiance at the same time. Quite a good move. So we move on now, 1936, to Zane Grey. Now, Zane Grey, well known during the 20s and 30s for producing loads and loads of books, cowboys books especially. Riders of the Purple Sage was one of them. But he had this nice idea of creating a film where he, as Zane Grey, supposedly the great white hunter, would go and kill sharks. And so he got together his backers, and they came up with an idea. And this actually is quite interesting because here he is, and he's going off. He wants to go and kill the sharks. Okay. And the problem is that he has an anti-fishing activist there who doesn't want him to kill the sharks. And so this has got a sort of ecological sideline to it. And he was actually quite interested in ecology, although he was a great hunter. Well, I say a great hunter, he liked to kill things. But they made this film and it showed the differences between the points of view of the anti-fishing people, the ecologists, and the hunters. And Zane Grey was the hunter. Unfortunately, they went to the Great Barrier Reef to film this, and somehow or other, they couldn't find any sharks, or certainly couldn't find any white sharks. So they had to make some cardboard ones, or canvas ones. Didn't go down so well. Just to give you an idea of what the film actually looked like. Here we have our main characters. On the right, talking to the young lady, is Zane Grey himself without the hat. And in the middle, the sort of dorky looking one, is the guy, Alfred Frith, that played the environmentalist. So it has a sort of environmental overtones to it. Now, around about this time, 1938, we come across Hans Hess. Now, Hans Hess has had an enormously long career doing things like doing underwater filming. And one of his first, well, in fact, exactly his first film that he did was called Hunting Under the Sea. Now, Hunting Under the Sea, because they were spearfishermen and they went spearfishing, but they took not scuba equipment. They took something rather strange, which I'll explain later, with them, and they took spears. So let's have a look. Here's Hans, his two sidekicks, three musketeers. And this is Hunters Underwater. At least I hope it is. That's what I've been told it is. So here we are. He's explaining how his camera is clockwork underwater, and when everything else fails, give it to a pretty girl to hold, and you get some interesting shots of the winding mechanism. So yes, she's looking at it. Yes, it's a box. So now this is the little boat they hired. Now this is not what we normally call a dive vessel, but they're basically snorkeling, although they do have underwater breathing gear as well. So they're looking around, seeing what they can find. Of course, they only had the one camera, so they had to do shots from shore and then shots underwater. And there they go, working their way down. Looking for fish. Obviously, if you've taken all this trouble filming, you might as well use the film. It's shot on 16mm film. And you can see when they said they were spearfishing, they really have got spears. Yeah. Ah, he's seen something interesting. It's a shark. Looks like a small hammerhead shark. They're not going to take that on, but they will film it. It's difficult to tell which one's which with this sort of filming. So that was their very first one, and it was very successful. And what they did was they took this film, or Hans took the film and a lot of slides, and he went and did lectures all around Germany. And they were incredibly popular because no one had seen anything like this before. And he could talk. He was a scientist. He was, in fact, an early graduate. He graduated. He hadn't got a PhD yet. That came a little bit later. But he was a scientist, and he talked, and he was quite involved with ecology, despite the fact that they went spearfishing. But there was a good reason for that. They went spearfishing because they couldn't afford food to eat, so they ate what they caught. And the other thing that they did was that they sold it in the market, and that gave them enough money to move on to the next area. So he used Drager oxygen rebreathers made for the fire service. Now, you've probably seen rebreathers these days, which are very complicated computer-controlled things. These were not like that at all. The whole idea was you breathed in from the bottle oxygen, you breathed out. That air went through through a bottle of soda lime, remove the carbon dioxide, and then you got a second go, and third go, and fourth go of breathing the air that you just breathed out. When it was getting a bit iffy, the cylinder would release a bit more. It was time to release a bit more gas. When you were actually underwater with it, you had to keep releasing the gas to do the pressure. There was no proper pressure regulator as there is on an aqualung these days. So he gave lectures and showed slides, okay? And he wanted to make a proper film. He tried with color film and things like that. He wanted to make a feature film in the Red Sea. And he came up with a script, but the people that were investing in it said it had to have a girl. He wasn't pleased. This is Lottie. Now, you may have come across Hans and Lottie Hass. This is that Lottie. Lottie was a graduate. She was a smart girl. She graduated from university, and she'd been to some of the lectures that Hans had given, and she was really quite taken with him. And so she applied to be his secretary, and she got the job. During the time between her getting the job and actually starting, she learned to dive. So when they were with the investors, she was there serving coffee and doing all sorts of things that secretaries do. And they said, well, why not try her? She'll look all right underwater. So that's what happened. She got the job of the female star in the film. But also, she got to be the assistant director. She did a lot of underwater filming. She was the safety officer. She was a very, very capable lady. So capable that Hans and Lottie were married for 62 years until he died. So a lot of stuff about Lottie. In the, must have been the 50s, late 50s, they did 2 series, underwater series, Diving to Adventure and The Undersea World of Adventure. And these had English tracks on them, so they could sell them elsewhere in the world. He'd done lots of other ones, or he did lots of other ones in German, but these were actually in English, sort of English. He did have a very strong accent. So my wife and I were watching them in our respective parts of the UK when we were kids, both of us on 9-inch black and white TVs. And Hans would do the narration and say, and here you can see the blau fish mit the yellow spots. And we're absolutely taken with it. However, we did finally take up scuba, but it was the English cold water that stopped us from doing it initially. Plus, it was a very dangerous and expensive thing to do, and we couldn't afford it. When we came to Malta, first time we came to Malta, we learned to scuba dive, and we were very happy from then on. So, but Hans Haas wasn't the only person that made nature documentaries. Jacky Cousteau, the Red Hat, and he's got an interesting quote from him. What is a scientist after all? It's a curious man looking through a keyhole, the keyhole of nature, trying to know what's going on. Now, he made 115 films, 50 books, TV series. He was a president of aquariums. He did all sorts of things. He had no scientific qualifications whatsoever. He was a citizen scientist, probably one of the most impressive citizen scientists. He did all sorts of things. He organized a revolt against the French government dumping radioactive material in the sea. And he got a load of children to sit on the rails in front of the trains to stop them. So he did all sorts of things. He and a colleague of his invented the aqualung. So what we use today, the scuba equipment, self-contained underwater breathing apparatus, that's all due to him. He designed the regulators and things like that. He had an underwater flying saucer submarine. He created underwater habitats, 100 meters down, where divers, saturation divers could stay, scientists could stay down there and do experiments down there under the water. I must admit, he's got one, there is one of his in Florida, and I went to see it. I didn't actually go in it, but it was in a really mucky little lagoon, so it didn't look terribly nice. You could only get into it with scuba gear or a good breath. Anyway, these are some of the things he did. He was a member of the French Resistance, as I say, did all sorts of things. One of the things he did do, though, is he's been identified as introducing the killer algae, destroying much of the Mediterranean ecosystem, probably accidentally released from the sea from the tropical fish aquarium when he was the director. If you've seen The Life Aquatic with Steve Zissou, it's a pastiche of Cousteau. It's really quite clever, even down to the red hats. So what did he do? This is going on a little bit further, and you can see the first part of this film is where they're creating a shark cage to go and dive with, and the second part is part of their work on looking at how to save downed aircraft, people or whatever, who were in shark-infested waters, and what sort of things they could do to stop them being eaten. Not necessarily the sharks would actually eat them, but there was always a possibility. Okay, so let's see how this goes. A little bit dramatic music.
The heat in the Red Sea has averaged 105 degrees during the day, but water conditions remain excellent for filming. Today we will fish for sharks, looking for evidence that our tagging operation has been effective.
With divers standing by in case of emergency, Cousteau allows a broader test.
This is
3 men floating amidst sharks. Apparently, all the creature sees are dark, confusing objects, with no limbs or feet to bite at, no familiar shapes, and no smell. The Johnson screen is the most effective shark protection yet devised.
They don't seem to use them anymore, but okay, moving on. Killer shark. You know, it's the usual sort of thing. People go out fishing for sharks, someone gets killed, they go off, they go and try and kill the shark on the basis that it's the shark's fault. If you go into where the shark lives, you know, you should take what you get. So anyway, the reason putting this on, it's got Roddy McDowall in it. You probably don't know Roddy McDowall, but you might recognize him from this. He was one of the original actors in Planet of the Apes, and had the major role in it. Okay, so we'll move on again to, this is a major one. This is a Disney production, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. This cost $5 million to make, so it's a pretty expensive thing. Most of you have probably seen it Saturday afternoons or something like that, or maybe Sunday afternoons after lunch. Sit down, keep out of the heat, watch the TV, and 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea comes on. It's quite an impressive film, but there are some interesting things about the sharks. So here is the poster that suggests that there are, you know, terrible man-eating sharks around. But let's see what actually happens. What's really clever in the next clip is that some of it's shot actually underwater and some of it's shot in the air in the studio. And in order to get the colors right, they actually blew dust into the air, which was pretty bad for most of the cameramen and everyone else. But it was all right for the actors because they were in the underwater suits, although they were very hot. So let's have a look. Okay, so they're going after buried treasure, and you can see that they've got the special Captain Nemo diving equipment. Here's the shark. Not too sure what type of shark that is. Here he comes. Oh, did you see that mouth? Remember, this is a Disney film. Here are the guys actually underwater, and here they are out of the water. Yes, look at that. Meanwhile, and there's our shark again. See its mouth? Stunt shark. It's actually just got a dye pack underneath it, and it just swims off. It's not hurt at all. So, see what I was saying about the mouth? Being Disney, he decided that the shark didn't look good enough or angry enough and didn't have its mouth open when it came towards the divers. So they painted them in. Every single frame that you see with the shark's mouth on, somebody took and very carefully painted a series of mouths with teeth on each of the frames, and then they were included in the main film. The film itself basically has a main thing is an attack by a giant squid, which strangely seems to moves in the wrong direction, but never mind, it's Hollywood. So it was a huge film, great hit, and it's been popular ever since, as long as you take the premise a little bit with a pinch of salt. So we can move now on to Jane Russell. Now, Jane Russell was a well-known movie star, and this film, Underwater, this cost $3 million to make, but it was a Howard Hughes production. Now, Howard Hughes is famous for various things. He had a little thing about Jane Russell, and in a previous film of hers, The Outlaw, he designed a cantilevered bra, I'm not too sure quite how it works, for her, that would mean that she could wear very low-cut blouses to let her charms show, and without them falling out and spoiling the shot. And he did exactly the same thing for this, the Underwater film. He designed the swimsuits specially so as they would provide support but not look as though they are. So this is the film Underwater. It does have sharks in it. They don't do very much, but it is quite an impressive film. And you can see from the marquee here, no expense was spared with the publicity, and you won't believe what they did next. Okay, but let's have a look at the film. It's got sharks in it. Where are they? And it's got a surprise. Okay, big publicity build-up. It's a shark. What a small shark. Howard Hughes, like the Jeff Bezos and of his day, I suppose. Billionaire, hugely. Joseph Callear, he was a Maltese actor who made it big in Hollywood.
Underwater world with Jane Russell as you've never seen her before in Underwater.
Okay, and she actually did most of the underwater scenes.
$3 million. Skin diver action, aqua lung thrills, and the stronghold of the shark brought vividly to the screen.
Speaking of the morning, Dominic, are you going on this?
Sure, Chiquita. I never felt better in my life.
Knock it off.
A little bit stereotyped, but he's there.
The race is caught down now.
Just to add a little bit of interest, this wreck that they're on is on the edge of a huge cavern and about to disappear elsewhere. So that you get an idea of what the film's all about. But if you thought the marquee was over the top, okay, they previewed the film Underwater to a group of 156 journalists and others wearing diving equipment. The showing was on the 10th of January, 1955, was held in Silver Springs, Florida. Screen and benches were set up 20 feet underwater in a small lake, and a glass-bottomed boat held the projector. Reviewers who wanted to remain dry viewed the film from 6 small submarines. Richard Branson, eat your heart out. Howard Hughes really knew how to do things. And interestingly, it was filmed in Superscope. Now, Superscope was a really weird process. Basically, you did it on an ordinary 35mm film, ordinary lenses and everything. And then what you did, would you cut the top and bottom off and showed it in cinemas as a widescreen film. You just had to make sure all the action was right in the middle of the screen. Otherwise, you cut it off when you cut the top and bottom off. So that was another big budget production. The sharks survived. They didn't do anything terrible. Now here we come, the shark fighters. Now there's reason for this, not just the fact that it's a very big shark and the man has a very small knife. Actually, if you look at a shot from the film, the same shot, the man has the same size knife. However, the sharks are very, very much smaller. But there is a big thing about this. During the Second World War, there was an American destroyer sent to an island near Japan, and it had in it with the firing mechanism for Little Boy. And Little Boy was the first nuclear bomb to be dropped on Hiroshima. Well, the only one to be dropped on Hiroshima, the first one to be dropped. And it had the firing mechanism. And because the firing mechanism was British, it actually had the man with it who had to set the bomb off, had to set the firing mechanism. And he actually had to go on the aircraft as well in Algae that dropped the bomb. But anyway, this was a totally secret mission. And so they were a complete radio silence. And what they did, they sailed very quickly across the ocean to the island, dropped everyone else, turned around and decided to go back again. Now, remember, totally secret. Nobody knew they were there. Unfortunately, they ran into a Japanese submarine. Japanese submarine torpedoed, can't say it in a minute, torpedoed them, and the ship sank in 12 minutes. It was a very serious thing. 300 people died when the ship sank. There were another 1,200 in the water. Unfortunately, because it sank so quickly, they didn't have time to get the lifeboats off, or all the lifeboats off, and the life rafts. There are a few life rafts, but not enough for 900 people in the water, many of whom were seriously injured, burnt, and so on. And many of them died very soon after getting in the water. Nobody knew they were there. The radio operator had managed to get off a distress mayday signal, but because everyone knew that that ship wasn't supposed to be in that area, everyone assumed it was a spoof sent out by the Japanese trying to lure ships in so they could be torpedoed. So these 900 men stayed in the water, dying for 4 days. Now, during this time, obviously, those that died or were bleeding or anything else like that attracted the sharks. And sharks are very partial to rotting meat. They're not really worried what sort of meat it is. They've got incredible digestive systems. They can just eat it. So they were eating the dead bodies. Now, because there weren't enough lifeboats and life rafts to go around, the guys were taking it in turns to get in and out of the water. So they would spend their time in the water, but sometimes the sharks would give them a little nip. They would fight back, they were alive, but of course they'd be wounded, and they would, with the blood loss and so on, they would quite often die and then float away and become food for the sharks. So of this 900 that survived, only 300 got to be picked up at the end. It's a major disaster for the Americans. And the film itself, getting back to the film, is about the process that they went through after the war to try and create proper shark repellents. And as you can see, it's not doing too well for Victor Mature at this time. Victor Mature actually was an English actor, not an American actor. But he was in lots of films, quite a lot of English films as well. Anyway, that was the film. And there's a lot here about the USS Indianapolis, 1945, that you can look at later. Now we go on to what is probably the first underwater series that actually was interesting in terms of ecology. Mike Nelson was supposedly from the Coast Guard service. Lloyd Bridges, who played him, had actually been in the Coast Guard service during the war. And his two sons, Jeff and Bo, Jeff Bridges and Bo Bridges, were both in the Coast Guard service as well. But he learned to scuba dive there. And he also learned to like the sea. And he wanted to keep it as it was. So when he was offered this part, a lot of the stories involved around putting things into the sea, like dangerous wastes, or picking up radioactive satellites from the water and doing all sorts of things. So he worked independently as a scuba diver. But when he wasn't doing that and taking people on scuba diving adventures and things like that, he would work with a professor, and they were doing ecological research on seaweed and all the things around. And he explains all this. It's really, a lot of it is all about underwater safety, and he demonstrates the sort of things that you probably did when you were learning to scuba dive, taking a balloon down underwater, blowing it up and allowing it to go up and see what happens, and it blows, obviously blows up with the changing pressure. all sorts of things like that, demonstrating the dangers of scuba diving, but also how to do it safely and giving an ecological message as well. So in 1961, they changed producers and they decided they wanted to make it much more of a cops and robbers, high-speed chases and fighting with sharks series. So he left and the series stopped after that because they couldn't really replace him. They tried in 1981 with Ron Ely, who had been Tarzan, to reboot the series, but only lasted one series and so on. But it was a really interesting one. There's a lot of stuff here about Lloyd Bridges that you can look at later. And James Bond had fun with sharks. And yet again, it is a shark-infested swimming pool. Why do villains always have shark-infested swimming pools? So, how does he get through this? Now, this is Sean Connery having a bit of bad luck. Luckily, he's got something. His trusty penknife kills the bad guy, but they're letting the sharks in. There he is. Patently not Sean Connery. Still not Sean Connery. Opening it, and out comes the... now, this is Sean Connery. Going to go in. He's hiding behind perspex, which was all very good until the shark realized it could actually get over the top of the perspex. So this is why he's swimming quite as fast as he is. So James Bond, Thunderball, lots of underwater action, really quite, for its time, a good film. No ecological stuff in it at all. Live and Let Die. Well, the sharks don't seem to get their just desserts at this stage. So here we have Roger Moore reprising the role of James Bond. And he and the bad guy go into the water. And there are the sharks. Here they come. Luckily, in his mouth, he has some sort of strange device which he pushes into the mouth of the bad guy, which causes the bad guy to expand.
Did have an inflated opinion of himself.
An inflated opinion of himself. Great one-liners. Always a pretty girl somewhere in a James Bond film. And of course, we can now move on to Jaws. Okay, so it is the wrong Jaws. But let's see what he does. Okay, remember metal teeth? And lo and behold, look, it's a shark-infested swimming pool again. And he drops him in. So, what will happen to... Well, actually, it's a bad guy. Will the sharks get the bad guy? Here's Jaws. Well, he's killed the shark. Happy man. Unfortunately, the UN is getting rid of the secret base. And there he goes. The stuntman trying to get out of the way rather quickly. So, we actually get to the right thing. But what is this? Well, all together now. Da-da, 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 and so on. This is actually from someone's PhD thesis. Yep. Jaws had that sort of effect. People are writing PhD theses just on the music. And this is one of the parts from the thesis where they've actually got second by second what happens on film and what the music is and what the orchestration is. So, and then there's a lovely line that I found in this from the thesis of Sharks and Spaceships, the role of the tuba. Greg will like this, the role of the tuba in John Williams film scores. And it compares Jaws and Close Encounters of the Third Kind. And Williams combined a sparsely textured modernistic sound with standard musical devices used in horror film music in his score to Jaws, and it goes on. And you can read that at your leisure later when we put this up on the website. However, let's get back to Jaws. Yeah, 1974. Now, you're probably saying Jaws was 1975. Yeah, but the book came out in 1974. So you're used to the picture on the left as being Jaws. Well, actually, the one on the right was the first book jacket that Jaws came out with. It was only afterwards that they came out with this slightly different one, which is maybe involves a bit more of the plot. And I have to say, looking at that shark, it doesn't look much like a white shark to me. That looks much more like a mako. Look at the teeth. The teeth don't look right at all. But anyway, who am I to criticize a worldwide phenomenon? So here we are at 1975, the film, and you can see what they've done to the picture, to the book jacket, to make things a bit more interesting. Okay, so you could go back and have a look. So this is the poster for the film. The story: shark comes into a small seaside town. It eats someone. The body's discovered. The sheriff wants to close the beaches. The mayor doesn't want him to. They back down. It comes the weekend, 4th of July weekend. Everything's open. Everyone's in the water. And of course, the shark comes round. So taglines for this: on the 4th of July, fishing season will open on you. And one of the things that the film does very well is shows the sort of terror of people once they know there is a shark in the water. So we'll have a look at that. Here we are. It's a nice quiet beach. Throwing the stick out for the dog. Okay, so this is not actually from the film. This is from the Oceans Conservation Alliance, the Afri-Oceans Conservation Alliance. And they made a series of these, but it's actually a shot-for-shot recreation of an actual scene from the film. But it gives a very good lesson at the end. The point is that the seat you're sitting on is probably 150 times more likely to kill you than a shark. So bear that in mind when you're polishing the chairs. You never know what might happen. So there are lots of things in Jaws, some of which are correct and some of which aren't. And let's just look at the first two. So sharks can bear a grudge. Well, maybe. We know from work that's been done that sharks recognize people. They can tell people apart, and they will spend more time near people that treat them well than people that don't treat them well. So if people poke sticks at them and things like that, they will stay away from them, even though these people might be feeding them. They will come in, feed, and go away. If people like them, they may well spend time with them. Sharks bite at boat engines. Well, yes, they do. The thing is, sharks can detect electrical signals, electrical pulses and such. Boat engines produce very large amounts of them. So probably the sharks are just trying to quieten down the boat just to stop it, because it must be quite impressive for the sharks ampullae of Lorenzini, which measure the or react to electrical impulses. If they're close to a boat, it's chucking out a load of it. It must be almost like, you know, having an electric drill by the side of your ear or something like that. Sharks eat people. Well, very rarely. They might eat people when they're dead. They're quite happy. Anything for an easy meal. But very rarely. They don't eat people. Sometimes they taste people, and normally it's younger sharks that do this. So there are lots of other things. You can have a look at these, and maybe you can search out the answers yourself. But there are some interesting things to think about there. So what happened with the film? Well, they wanted to shoot it completely on the ocean. They wanted to train great white sharks to actually do the stunts. It cost twice as much to produce. It took 3 times as long to produce, make, mainly because the sharks didn't work very well. On the other hand, it did produce almost 40 times its cost in profit. Okay. The sharks were so bad, the film is quite often called flaws by the crew. There's a lot of actual shark footage in it, made by Ron and Valerie Taylor, fantastic people who have done wonderful things with sharks. And the shark was named Bruce. Now, pretty much everyone knows the shark's called Bruce, after Spielberg's lawyer. And he was working with Spielberg and the studio and trying to save costs, to negotiate between the studio, trying to get them to save costs. And that actually comes into something else that we'll see a little bit later. Robert Shaw and Richard Dreyfuss hated each other. Robert Shaw was a sort of military person. Richard Dreyfuss was the sort of long-haired hippie of the day, and they have very different views. They really didn't get on, which actually does show in quite a few of the scenes. And lots of the people were seasick. Okay, so here's something that you're probably very familiar with.
You're going to need a bigger boat.
Yep, you're going to need a bigger boat, said by Roy Schneider. And that's the section from the film, but that's not where the line came from. It wasn't in the script. It was never in the script. What was caused it was, if you look at the bottom picture, this is what they used to, a barge, a filming barge. At the moment, they've just got the camera on it. And it was what they used to use to film the boat in the sea, so as they didn't actually have to have cameras on it, because there was nowhere to put the cameras most of the time. So the sort of shots that you're seeing here were actually shot from outside the boat. So but they would have to have the cameras, lights, things like that. And you can see how flimsy this thing is. And at one stage during filming, Schneider was looking at the lighting barge, and it was so obviously overloaded, it was about to tip up. Consequently, he just made the remark,
"You're going to need a bigger boat."
That's right. That's what he said. And it was such a nice line that Spielberg heard when he was looking at the playbacks. He actually incorporated it into the film, which actually happened quite a few times, because they couldn't get the shark to do what they wanted. They had to do other things, which actually have been quite impressive. So there we go. Yeah, that's where that comes from. Now, there's a shark cage scene. Spot the real shark. Well, actually, it's all the real shark, I have to tell you. But Ron and Valerie Taylor were sent off to Australia, to Shark Alley, to do some filming. And there's a scene where they need the great white shark to destroy the shark cage. Well, they realized they couldn't do it with the mechanical shark. It just wouldn't do it. So they got sent off. And what they did, they produced a half-size shark cage, and then they found a very small jockey. And they fitted him up with a miniature wetsuit, and a miniature tank, a miniature breathing, a miniature absolutely everything else. So when he was in the cage, it looked like the guy that played Hooper, Richard Dreyfuss, in his equipment. So what you're actually seeing is Richard Dreyfuss back in the studio, swimming down to the bottom out of the way. And then you see what the shark does to the cage. And they kept this in the film. It was such a good thing. So it's not a 25-foot shark. It is a white though. And the reason it did that to the cage was that it got caught in the ropes that were holding the cage close to the boat. And when it struggled to get free, it just destroyed the entire cage. So they used it in the film because it was such a good scene. But according to the script, Hooper was killed in that. Well, you saw him disappearing down. That's because the guy that was in the cage, the little jockey, got out very quickly. So that was yet another improvised scene that got into the film. So how did Bruce work? Badly is the answer. You can see from the picture on the right, it was immensely complicated. They got the camera barge, the special effects barge, loads and loads of cables going up and down to move it backwards and forwards on a trolley. They had hydraulics to open and close the mouth and things like that. Oh, absolute disaster. And the other thing was, it looked a bit too shiny. One of the things they ended up doing was spraying it with ordinary car paint and then throwing sand at it to try and get it to look right, having spent a small fortune on special paint, but it turned out to be too shiny. So Bruce worked badly. What happened to Bruce in the end? Well, this is the top picture is Algae Brothers scrapyard. That's where they took, when they finished the film, they took all the shark bits and dumped it there, plus anything else that they didn't need, because that was it. That was, as far as they were concerned, the end of the film. And they didn't want to see the shark again. And the Algae brothers said, well, you know, it's a big shark. It tears things to pieces. We're a scrapyard. We tear things to pieces. And so they used it for advertising. Recently, when the scrapyard was about to move, because it turned out that the city had moved out and it became prime real estate, they moved out to somewhere else. They decided they really ought to do something because the shark was quite popular. People would come from miles around, and so they donated it to the Academy Museum of Motion Pictures. So that's where Bruce has ended up, or not, maybe. So Jaws 2. What was in Jaws 2? Well, not what you saw on the screen, because Spielberg originally wanted Jaws 2 to be a prequel to Jaws. And you remember I was talking about USS Indianapolis? Well, in Jaws itself, you find that Quint, the guy that wants to catch the shark, hates sharks because he was on the Indianapolis. And what Spielberg wanted to do was to go back and make a film about the USS Indianapolis and Quint and how come he got to be as he was, hating sharks and so on, and how he changed. And you know, everyone was up for that, except, of course, the film people, the film company, because they wanted another Jaws. They made so much money on the first one. They thought, well, if you make money doing one thing, do it again, you'll make money again. Well, did they? Well, Jaws 2 wasn't too bad. Jaws 3D was dire. And Jaws the Revenge, Michael Caine, for heaven's sake. You know, you can walk through a film, but, you know, anyway. And Jaws 5 has been mooted. Luckily, it's not got much further, although there is suggestions now that Spielberg might go back and remake the original Jaws using CGI. But, you know, I don't think that's a good idea. However, just bear in mind that in Back to the Future Part 2, by 2015, we'd be up to Jaws 19. It hasn't happened yet, but almost. And I've got some spoof movie trailers for you to watch. If you want to look at the last one, it's absolutely brilliant, although it's actually Jaws 1. But these are fun things to see. So deep blue sea, oh dear. Once again, you give, well, you give sharks human DNA when you're searching for a cure for Alzheimer's disease. The sharks get smart and want to get out of the facility, and they fight back. It is a film that has dire special effects. Individually, they're not so bad, but when you look at them as a whole, the shark changes size all the way through. It's very important. Deep Sea 2, a brilliant billionaire creates 5 genetically altered bull sharks. So they were bull sharks in the first one, just a couple of them, 5 in the second one, 3 in the last one. Basically, it's the same film being remade. Make the sharks intelligent, they destroy where the scientists are and wreak havoc elsewhere. So, Finding Nemo. Now here Bruce comes back to the fore. Here he is. Here's Bruce. Now, what's special about Bruce?
We got company.
Well, it's about time,
He's a
mate.
We've already
vegetarian.
gone through the snacks and I'm still starving.
We almost had to have a feeding frenzy.
Come on, let's get this over with.
Right then, the meeting has officially come to order. Let us all say the pledge. I am a nice shark, not a mindless eating machine. If I am to change this image, I must first change myself. Fish are friends, not food.
Now, Bruce is a vegetarian shark. He's not the only one, but unfortunately, most sharks are carnivorous. I say most sharks. There's not such a thing as a truly vegetarian shark. I used to be able to say, absolutely, all sharks are carnivorous. But of course, some scientist playing about in the laboratory did some work on the bonnethead shark and discovered that within the stomach of the bonnethead shark are enzymes that can break down cellulose. So the bonnethead shark has been seen chewing on seaweed and seagrass, and the idea was that probably what it was doing was it was eating the microorganisms that were on the small animals, the crustaceans and things that were on the sea grass, and so they needed the enzymes to break it down. So Bruce, vegetarian. Here we come, another veggie shark. If you're looking at the watches, we're almost at the end. It's a really nice little clip, this. Here he comes. Here's the shark. We get the Jaws music, or something similar. There we go.
Hi, I'm Lenny. Oh, little buddy, did I scare you? I'm sorry. Wake up, wake up. Okay.
Hang on, just make it a bit louder.
Don't worry about it. I'm gonna get you out in a jiffy. You just keep holding your breath, little wormy.
Yo, Lenny!
I'm coming, Frankie!
Well, move it. Come on, Pop's waiting.
Here we go. And gotcha! Okay, buddy, you're free. Now escape. Go. Just go. Cry freedom. Oh, you almost gave me a heart attack.
As long as anyone could remember, Lenny
So this is how we find out he's a
I
vegetarian.
don't know how else to say this to you, Lenny. You see something, you eat it, period. That's what sharks do. You gotta understand, when you look weak, it makes me look weak.
I know.
Right here in front of me now, eat this.
Oh, jeez, Hop. Here's the thing.
I'm a vegetarian.
You're a good person.
Oh, no.
So, okay. So I suppose I have to tell you, do the Meg. The Meg has been a disaster for us in some ways. National Geographic produced a spoof, supposedly found footage video of an attack on a boat by a megalodon. And it was all very good because they put it out worldwide on the 1st of April. But for some reason, it wasn't actually shown in Malta until September. So nobody actually got the joke. The 1st of April, obviously April Fool's Day, it was an April Fool's joke. A very good one, but not if it comes in September. We spent ages talking to children at the National Aquarium saying, it's not real. The megalodon died out at least 3 million years ago, which is a long time, believe me. But it's quite a fun film. It's a Jason Statham film, so it has to be quite fun. It's got a lot of humor in it, and it's got some really quite good special effects. This is one of the better ones.
Yeah, jellyfish.
Yeah, very nice little bit of CGI there. So I don't really talk much more about that. But the thing about Jaws is that it produced loads and loads of films where the sharks went on the rampage or tried to eat people and things. Most of the time when I've been swimming with sharks, I've never had any problems with them. In fact, you can see a shark swimming towards you when you're scuba diving. It comes towards you, looks at you and goes, oh no, it's one of those bubbly things. Moves out to the side of you, carries on round, goes back, carries on in its way. Never had any problems with sharks. So we got 2-headed sharks, 3-headed sharks, 5-headed, 6-headed sharks. We missed out on 4-headed sharks for a reason. Atomic sharks, toxic sharks, shore sharks, mega sharks, ghost sharks, Nazi sharks, mega sharks, trailer park sharks, virus sharks, shark octopus, Sharknado, Quoja, zombie shark, Empire of the Sharks, sand sharks, avalanche sharks, shark and stuff. I can't even say them fast enough. But Hammerhead, Ozark, Planet of the Sharks, sewer sharks. Pretty much a good way to almost end this. So let's carry on. Bruce's last appearance, he didn't actually disappear in its entirety. This is his last appearance in a film so far, anyway. And here he is. This is actually one of the models from they had left over from the film they found in one of the storage areas. Okay, so here it is. It's a real Bruce. I think that was Jurassic World. Anyway, finally, okay, we have finally got to the end. You remember what we were saying about maybe sharks can hold a grudge? You know, they can like people and not like people. What you can see here is this is from the National Aquarium here in Malta. And the aquarist, is the guy in the wetsuit, is there happily cleaning the inside of the tanks. So the viewing area gets to be okay. Now, the thing is, the zebra shark that you can see in the shot, he raised from a tiny, tiny pup, and he fed it and looked after it. And they developed I suppose, an intimacy that you don't normally see between sharks and people. So let's see what happens. Here's a shark. And what's it going to do? It's going to come and say hello. In fact, it likes to have its belly rubbed. Okay, so he gives it a bit of a cuddle. And it turns over. It does have teeth. It's quite a big shark. But this is the only person the shark does it with. It's a she. And in fact, the male shark gets really quite jealous when she does this. And he'll come in and quite often nip her to get her out. So this is Jaws. Any questions? Okay, so feel free to put questions in the chat. I see we've got some in there. What can I do here? Okay, Hi, Dave. Break a leg. Well, thank you. This is the Sharklab Malta team from Gadira. Lena, Sammy. Oh, you're all on. Excellent. Connection might drop. Okay. Nurse shark. So you reckon the nurse shark in Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea, or the shark in Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea, was a nurse shark? It didn't have the little bits coming down from the front of the mouth. So that's what made me think maybe it wasn't, or maybe Disney painted them out. You know, they're clever at that.
Screen, then you can see the people talking.
So, okay. So, anything else? No, I've come to the end. Very interesting talk. Oh, there are several species. Okay. So, anyone else got any questions? You're probably all bored with my voice by now, but I can always go on a little bit longer. Let me stop sharing my screen, and then I can see you. Oh, yep. So, if you have a question you'd like to ask, and you think I have the slightest chance of answering, feel free to unmute yourself and ask a question. No? You're all asleep. That's what it is. I managed to bore you to death. It's just like when I was a teacher. You know, my students love me. They could have a lovely sleep during my lectures.
No, I assure you.
Ah, hello, Nicole.
Hi. I really enjoyed the talk. It's really interesting, and I really loved how you applied the history of films and how they incorporate sharks in it. I really like it.
Good. Well, good. Well, as I say, we'll be putting the presentation up on the website, so you'll be able to have a look at it again a little bit later if you want to. Okay. Anyone else?
That sounds amazing. Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Okay, I've got to put the credits on it yet. I haven't quite got around to doing that, but once I've done that, we'll put it up on the website. Okay, any other questions? No? I definitely stunned you into silence. Okay, well, thank you for watching this, and I hope you found it interesting. And Tyler, I hope you're still awake over there and enjoying it. So we look forward to more of these, not the same. I'm not going to do the same one again, but we might do something else different. So look out for the sort of things that we've been doing and look in the website to see what's going on, and the Facebook and everything else. Okay. Right, well, I'm going to say goodbye. I'm going to go off to have some tea, which hopefully will be almost ready by now. So, you want to have a word, dear? No? Okay, that's just my wife coming and sitting down beside me. I've got is that a hand up?
It's a wave.
Oh, it's a wave, is it? Oh, it's not a hand up. My daughter's just stuck a hand up, giving me a wave. Well, that's very nice. Thank you, darling. Hope you enjoyed it. Okay, well, I'm going to end this now. Greg, if there's anything you want to say, if you want to say what's coming up next.
Actually, just a big well done, Dave. A fascinating insight into the history of sharks in film and the history of cameras. I think we weren't quite sure what you were going to present to us, but what you actually presented this evening has been exceedingly interesting and taken us from the very beginning until right up to date. So fantastic.
Yeah, I'm nothing if not thorough.
It's true. It's true. Excellent all round. So thank you very much, Dave.
Do we know what the next one's going to be?
If I could remember off the top of my head.
That's why I'm using your top of the head.
I think it was going to be about the fascinating diversity of sharks. So I was going to look at the different.
Okay, so that's something to look forward to. Okay.
In the mix. Perfect. Thank you.
Right. Thank you, everyone, for joining in and listening to me. And I will end the meeting for all. Okay. Right. Goodbye, everyone. Bye.
Thanks, Steve. Bye.